First of all, let me start with water. Water is life, therefore it touches everything.
This is the water source for everyone here. I've always carried more than I could really manage, but it was more important to fetch enough water than to listen to my body.
We founded the club because we didn't want the next generation to have to fight as we did. The floods came last year, and also the year before that. They turned our soccer pitch into a riverbank.
The river flowed right down to the middle of the road. We had to cross it to get home. We had no other choice.
I went there and saw it myself.
Climate change was caused by the energy sector, burning of more fossil fuel and things like that. But the impact is being felt by the water sector. With too much water, too little water, too much humidity, too little soil moisture. So climate change through water is affecting society, okay? Which means it's affecting just about everything. It's not just floods and droughts, you know? It's horticulture, it's livestock, it's human health. You keep naming it, just about everything, okay? What climate change is basically saying is the future is not going to be like the past.
Let's see if I get a turn today.
I don't know either. If they take too much, you certainly won't.
And these little buckets.
Little people are people too, no?
Done?
There's two more.
I meant with our water.
Your water's ready.
The water belongs to everyone.
My name is Kamala Devi Pathak. I live in Trempura, Sundari, in Saliantar. I got married when I was 17. I had my first child during my first year of marriage. Now I'm 42 and have 3 children. I had to fetch water, mow the grass, and I had many other household chores. I had to cook and clean for everyone. It was hard. That's how this happened to me.
हाम्रो फुटबल ग्राउन्ड हेटौडा पिप्ले 5 मा अवस्थित छ क्याम्पाडाँडा भन्ने ठाउँमा यो खेल
Soccer pitch is in Hatauda, Pipla 5, Kampadanda. We regularly train there.
त्यही भएर त्यो ग्राउन्डको कारणले गर्दा
The site gave us the chance to make friends and form a close community.
साटासाट गर्ने र साथीहरुसँग नजिक हुने मौका पाएका छौं त्यो ग्राउन्डमा खेलेर सबै भाइहरुलाई एउटा
We've created an environment of brotherly coexistence. People see us as protectors. It's become a place of mutual affinity, where there's a sense of belonging.
माया साटासाट र एउटा आफ्नोपनको चाहिँ आभास दिलाउने ठाउँ भएको छ पहिला त्यहाँ खेल मैदान भन्ने नै थिएन त्यहाँ एउटा
There was no sports field here before. People used it to bring their cows to pasture. There was nothing but grass and many large trees. We cleared the land ourselves. The trees had huge roots, but there are farmers and shepherds close by, and they often carry spades and shovels. They helped us to pull out the roots. We worked really hard to turn our practice field into a proper soccer pitch. That was 30 years ago. Since then, we train and play here.
Whenever I'm not at school, I like to play. I'd like to be a doctor. And when I'm older, I'd like to visit Kathmandu.
When we were younger, we had to fight very hard. Things didn't always go as we would have hoped. We're farmers, so when the harvest is good, we can eat. When it's not, then we don't have any work. That's just how it is. Everything I have is here. Our life and our land.
It takes about 3 hours to go fetch the drinking water and bring it back home. You need about 30 minutes to get to the well. Then it takes a while until you get the water. There are usually lots of people, and you have to wait your turn. There's only the one spring for everyone. The containers for carrying the water are heavy, but you always tell yourself that the more you can fetch on one trip, the longer the water will last at home.
आफैले गर्न पर्यो परेको गिरिस्तीमा बसेपछि मेसै साँझे पनि गर्न परिहाल्यो
I had to do it all by myself. There was no other option than to do the household chores alone. It takes around 1.5 to 2 hours to get home. The water is for us and for the cattle. I'd make the trip 4 to 5 times a week, sometimes even 6 times. That's why the illness got worse, and I had to have an operation.
त्यो बीचको चाहिँ बाबु पेटमा हुँदाखेरि अनि मलाई यस्तो रोग देखा पर्यो हो
The problems with my womb began when I was pregnant with my second son. But nothing is easy. Work is work.
त्यही नै काम हो अलिकति अब गर्नलाई एउटा आइमी
There weren't any other women in the house to help me. There were only men. They didn't help, and that's why it was very difficult.
सलेन्टरमा पानीको स्रोतहरू वरिपरि भए पनि पानीको सतह
There are springs around Salyantar, but the water levels are very low. People still need to fetch drinking water. Tap water in the villages isn't potable, but it can be used for washing, for the cattle, or for household chores.
पाइपलाइनबाट आएको पानीहरू नुहाउन, वस्तुलाई खुवाउन, खाना पकाउन आदिमा प्रयोग
The Nepalese government has been trying to supply Salyantar with water since 1975, but there are still unresolved problems.
There are places in Nepal where entire villages on the hills are being abandoned because the springs have dried. And there's no way you can get the water there. There's just no way because the next water source may be 500 meters down below. Now, you can carry water to 20, 50 meters. You can't carry 500 meters everyday water and still hope to survive. Himalayan springs are not on anybody's radar right now. It's springs that people use for drinking water in the hills. People don't use streams. And unless we properly understand that and do something about it, hill life is going to be untenable, all across the Himalaya.
Sanchana मेरो दिदी पर्छ
Sanchana is my older sister.
सञ्चनाले मलाई होमवर्क सिकाउँथ्यो
She always used to help me with my homework.
सञ्चना र मेरो
We used to argue if I didn't do my homework.
She loved everyone, and she'd help her brothers and sisters with their schoolwork.
She liked studying and taught her younger siblings and cousins. She looked after them.
She was diligent in everything she did. We had financial problems. We couldn't provide for her in the way that we wanted to.
First, she went to a boarding school close by. Then we had too many children in the family, and we couldn't afford the boarding school anymore. So we sent her to a state school. It took her an hour to get there. She always said, I'll study hard and become very successful.
म पढ्छु यस्तो गर्छु म ठुलो मान्छे बन्छु भन्ने चाहिँ त्यो मेरो छोरीको नाम सञ्चना बलामी थियो
My daughter's name was Sanchana Balami.
खरेले बगायो
She was swept away in the floods.
Very regularly we hear the sentence, water is life. What is necessary for all aspects of life. Climate change is not just about temperature change, right? Warming. It's more than that. It's also about changes in the precipitation, rainfall. Nepal is one of the countries facing very high amount of climate change. The warming is quite intense in Nepal. It is around 0.06 degrees Celsius per year, which is quite intensive by global standards. The onset and retreat of monsoon seems to be changing. But the precipitation, the rainfall is also changing in this part of the world. It's not only about too much water, it's also about too little water.
I only took half.
You didn't fill it up? So this one's left over?
Yes, with that one it's 2 buckets.
Do 2 of the small ones fit into the large bucket?
2?
Yes, you could fill up 2 smaller buckets, not the larger one. Just that one and that one.
Can you fill that one?
Fill these 2. And the big bucket? Where'd you get the water?
I think it's ours.
No, the one you filled before.
Ah, you mean the 2 big buckets?
What did I say?
I didn't understand you.
All good.
Put more in then.
It really hurt. It itched inside. I was bloated and had major problems. During my period, I would bleed heavily. It was even more painful then. The bleeding was heavier than a body can bear. I had a prolapsed womb for 20 years.
Two years ago, uterine cases were frequent in Salyantar. Women were getting married very young and having children in quick succession, often 1 a year, plus they had many children.
Coming to Nepal, there's one study done in 2015. They have estimated 600,000 people are suffering from this disease. When a woman gives birth to a child, their organs gradually involve. That means they come to their original anatomical shape and size. So during that period, if she is bound to work hard, especially when the abdominal pressure, intra-abdominal pressure is increased. So in that situation, that process is little hampered. So they're gradually coming back to normal process is hampered.
The water problem plays a major role in connection with the uterine cases because women have to do all the household chores alone. They think they'll have more time for other tasks if they fetch a lot of water at once. This leads to them carrying too heavy a load. It's also not easy to walk uphill with these heavy loads. Carrying water over long distances is directly linked to the uterine issues. The women continue to work enduring great pain.
र पानीको जब बाढी आएपछि चाहिँ हामी पुलमा एउटा आँखाले हेरेर अन्दाज गर्यौं.
When the floods came, we had an observation post on the bridge. It was to register how high the water fell or rose in 1 hour. That's how we measured water levels in the affected area. There was a power cut that evening, so we went to the bridge with torches to check the water level. The rain was heavier than we could have ever imagined. The flooding was so powerful that the Kara River flowed right through the town and inundated around 800 houses. When the waters came, we launched a rescue operation. We went from door to door and said, "You must evacuate the house. The floodwaters are here." We informed everyone personally, house by house. I think 200 to 300 people took part in the rescue at the time.
200-300 भन्दा माथि थियो होला मान्छे उद्धार गर्ने मान्छे त्यति थियो होला.
ठीक छ मेरो अन्डरमा चाहिँ हामी 4-5 जना साथीहरु चाहिँ टिम बनेर चाहिँ
Under my supervision, some of our friends formed a team to go to the river and check the state of the houses there. We didn't know how to save people. It was a challenge. We used the inner tubes from car tires to get the residents out of the flooded areas. Our club members helped out too. Together we rescued 40 or 50 people.
I remember that in the past, the river used to burst its banks about every 10 years. But over the last 5 to 7 years, it's been happening every 2 years. Now that Hetauda is developed and built up, there's nowhere for the water to drain away naturally. There's a big difference between the floods of the past and those of today. Previously, the water was low and water just flowed through it. Today, gravel from the building sites in the mountains is tipped into the water. That pushes up the water level and means floodwaters are higher too.
Deforestation is increasing at a rapid rate in the Chure region. Similarly, there's also a lot of agricultural practices and there's an encroachment in the forest, which means that it's also leading to siltations and soil erosions because of the agricultural practices at the in the downstreams, and this is also leading to a lot of flash floods and debris flowing into the plain areas. These rivers that pass through the Churi region are always flooded, and without the proper management of Churi region, these problems are going to be aggravated in the future as well.
What the increased greenhouse gas actually causes is, of course, increase in the precipitation amount in this part of the world, in South Asia, but also the variability of monsoon precipitation year by year and within a season also increases.
I was at home that day. I was sleeping because I had a fever. When I told her she shouldn't go to school because it was raining so hard, she said she had exams and had to go.
Because it was raining, we were all worried about Sanchana. Her school was 1 hour away, and she probably had to walk through the river. I took the bus to pick her up. After a while, I caught sight of her walking home.
The school bus had stopped. My brother-in-law offered to drive the teachers over the dam. They said that the bus brakes would be too weak for that.
We had to cross the river. It was very swollen that day, but it was the only way back. We had no other choice. It was Sanchana, me, and 4 other people. The 6 of us walked in a row. I was holding on tight to Sanchana. The 2 others kept hold of 2 of Sanchana's friends. We took a few steps. I was focusing on Sanchana. As we moved forwards, she slipped and fell. I couldn't hold on to her shoulder anymore, so I grabbed her hand. Then the river swept Sanchana and me away. I kept hold of her.
I went down there and saw it myself. I had to watch as the flood swept away my daughter and my brother-in-law. I couldn't speak. I ran along the river, but I couldn't see anyone.
There were large rocks. We were carried further down the river, and I was getting struck left and right. After one of those impacts, I let go of Sanchana. I don't know exactly when. All I can remember is that I collided heavily 3 or 4 times. Eventually, I got out of the river. I looked everywhere for Sanchana, but she wasn't there. Everyone was crying, and I asked if they'd found Sanchana. I ran down the river to look for her, shouting. She'd been carried another 400 meters downstream.
I was sleeping. My brother-in-law called me. When I got there, the floods had already carried them both off. After a while, my brother-in-law came back. Someone else had found Sanjana further down the river and brought her to us. We took her to the medical center, but she was already dead.
People here live in close proximity with nature, and we mostly live in areas that is exposed to socio-environmental hazards like floodplains, steep slopes, and we also lack the necessary infrastructure needed to mitigate the changing impacts of climate. So therefore also we are so much vulnerable to it. No one is resilient enough to fight this emergency alone. We are together in it and we must act together against it. Only the difference is that we, the young people, women, citizens of poor countries, lies in the forefront to bear its gravest consequences. And the sad part is that many of the victims, they don't know what is happening and why they are suffering.
Climate justice is a very key component in the fight against climate change. And this is particularly very relevant for a country like Nepal, basically because this is an issue that has emerged from the, let's say, the bad development that the Western world did and the consequences that we are having to face now. When the UNFCCC Convention was negotiated, the focus was very much in the reducing greenhouse gas emission. 20 years later, if you see the present context, the whole climate change impacts dimension has changed. There's been a higher realization that just reducing greenhouse gas emission is not going to solve the problem. Even if we stop the emission right away now into the 0%, the impacts are already happening.
There are two aspects to solve this issue, let's say. One is reducing the emission. But then we know that even if we reduce the emission today, the impact is going to happen for many decades, so it will not stop. So the other way is to take actions to adapt to the changes. So that's the adaptation and resilience building. So local actions to adapt to the changes and build resilience of the people and society, I think that's very important.
So just reducing greenhouse gases emissions are not going to solve the problems. And this is a problem of the global world now. It's just not happening in any country. But the only question is, where's the resources? This is, of course, also under the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC Convention, that is the duties of these countries to support countries like ours. But if you also look at the Green Climate Fund or the other funds that are set up, it is extremely difficult the way the process and mechanisms have been established, in a way that it takes sometimes several years to reserve resources from the Green Climate Fund. For instance, even the Chure project that Nepal just received, it nearly took Nepal over 2 years to access these resources.
भने नि अब भन्दाखेरि अब फेमसमा जान्छ आफ्नो मनको पीडाहरू भन्न पर्दाखेरि फेमसमा जान्छ.
Things can get worse. If we talk about our problems, that can attract unnecessary attention, and things get more complicated because people know about them. It was very painful. I couldn't eat or sleep properly, so I sat around doing nothing. I couldn't eat, drink, or do any physical work. My husband didn't want to go to the doctor with me. I told him I wanted to go because I was getting weaker. Then I made the decision myself. My husband didn't want to go with me, so I went alone.
आफ्नो सुरले उठेर हिँडेको हो दबाई गर्न जाँदाखेरि मलाई त्यही त नि हस्पिटलबाट यहीँको हस्पिटलबाट अनि तपाई काठमाडौँ जानुपर्छ अब अप्रेसन गर्नुपर्छ अब तपाई झोक्राएर नबस्नु.
At the hospital in my village, they told me I had to go to Kathmandu for an operation.
यहाँबाट काठमाडौँसम्म चाहिँ म एक्लै गएको हो गाडीमा.
I traveled to Kathmandu by bus on my own.
अनि अब
At the time of the operation, they told me I had an infection.
अप्रेसन गर्न भनेर गएको बेलामा गिर्खाहरू रहेछ रे के. 2-4 दिन तपाई ढिला.
They said if I'd come just a few days later, I would have got cancer. I felt I had to have this operation to prevent cancer. My children are still young. I haven't married them off yet. Having children isn't enough. I'd also like to do something for them. This month, it'll be a year since the operation. Now I feel fine.
Nepali women, mostly in the rural areas, they take care of most of their household works. They need to bring the water, they need to grow the crops, they need to look after the children. I feel Nepali youth and women people are uniquely impacted by climate change because of the intersecting vulnerabilities such as the dependence on the agriculture and the lack of employment, the increase in the poverty rate and decrease in opportunities. Climate change only intensifies this impact in coming years.
One major impact is that, of course, they do not have as much amount of water, or they have to spend much more time fetching water from distant spring sources because the nearby spring sources have dried out. They spend, in some cases, hours to get water, which means the time they are, they have for other kind of more productive, more creative, work is reduced.
And the worst part is that the few countries who are mainly responsible in creating this mess are denying this existential threat with ineffective policies and also denying climate finance to the poor countries. The developed countries should support the developing countries by providing the climate finance and helping them to move towards the climate resilient development, parallelly cutting their own emissions, and the developing nations should also prioritize sustainable development and put nature in the heart of its development.
There are drivers, here and now drivers, of which we are guilty here and now today, of overpumping, of filling up recharge ponds, letting them silt and waste away, or just filling them up so that you build a bus park on it, or God knows what else, okay? And preventing this infiltration. This is within our ability to do something about with good policies, okay? If we don't do this, then with climate change, as things get worse, then this bad situation is going to get much worse.
Our pitch is unusable. We're trying to manage and we're training at a school. The sports field there isn't so good, but a bit better than the other options there are. So that's why we go there. There just isn't another pitch that's big enough. The field is small, but we're managing.
त्यो चाहिँ अब त्यसको दीर्घकालीन समाधान भनेको चाहिँ
The long-term solution is a 700-meter dam from the bridge to the soccer field. This barrier between the river and the sports field must be at least 3 meters high.
यसको दीर्घकालीन उपाय हो र यो चाहिँ जुन हाम्रो त्यो क्याम्पाको चौर छ त्यो चौरबाट
That's the only way to protect the town.
लानै पर्छ त्यसपछि बल्ल त्यो बस्ती सुरक्षित छ
The floods will return. The vital dam hasn't been built. We're worried that the next flood will wash away our training field again.
If we don't take action, we'll have a catastrophe on our hands. The town won't exist anymore. It'll be a desert with no people, no animals, no fertile soil, a wasteland.
When it comes to flood, the only solution our great irrigation flood control departments seem to think is just build embankments. Now that doesn't solve the problem because you build embankment in one area, the opposite side is going to get flooded. Okay. You build on both, then what happens is like with the Kosi River, you jacket the river. That's the term we use, like put a jacket on the river. So instead of allowing the river to flood and, deposit its silt all over, you jacket the river, the entire silt gets deposited within that narrow thing. The riverbed keeps rising until your embankment just can't hold because these are earthen embankments, okay? And then, it breaches the embankment and causes massive flooding. And this is purely because of stupid water management.
बाटै त्यही हो मेन त हैन बाटो त्यो नहिन्ने त कुरै भएन यस्तो अब बिस्तारै बिस्तारै भुलिदै गइया छ भन्नु हैन अनि तपाईको त्यहाँ गएपछि चाहिँ जो सम्झना बिर्सेको पनि आइहाल्छ होला
That's the main street. There's no way of avoiding it. When we drive along it and see the river, we slow right down. We still remember it. I always think of her before I reach this spot. We don't even allow the children to cross the road and are scared to let them leave the house. Even when there's only light rainfall, we're scared to send them to school. This road was built when we were small. We played there and even pitched in with the construction work. In the village, they'd collect money to build a suspension bridge. They'd already bought the materials and said they'd build it, but they didn't, and that's why the accident happened.
पहिला उका पुल पनि ल्याएको थियो हैन यहाँको अब जस गर्छु भन्दा भन्दै नगर्नाले एउटा घटना घट्यो
मैले म सँगै आइती गएको बेलामा सँगै लिएर गएको याद आइरहन्छ
I'll always remember taking her to visit my parents. Whenever we visited my family, she always scolded the other children when they misbehaved.
Sometimes she says she's not doing well, that she doesn't feel good, and she can't eat. We try and reassure her then and tell her that she needs to let the past go. We tell her to think of her two other children. Grieving won't bring her back.
Whenever I think of her, I want to cry. When I hear her name or look at her photo, I just can't believe she's no longer there.
अब पराइको घर गएपछि त अब भने चाहिँ सुविधा काट्न पाइँदैन बाध्यता पर्ने हुन्छ त्यही कारण
When my daughter grows up and has a husband, she won't be able to relax much. She'll have to work. That's why I'm not burdening her with work now.
कष्टले गर्दाखेरि मम्मीलाई यस्तो रोग लाग्यो म नि अब के जोगिनी होला त्यो पनि नानी
She saw how her mother fell ill because she worked too hard and carried too much.
मैले यति गर्दाखेरि मलाई यस्तो रोग
She'll have to try to come up with ways to avoid that. I'll tell her my story and ask her to pay attention to her health. I hope she doesn't have to live and suffer as I do. I want her to have a happy life.
अब हामीले चाहिँ लगत्तै त्यसलाई चाहिँ फिल्डलाई माटो भर्ने ग्रेडरहरू लगाउने र वरिपरि वृक्षारोपण गर्ने र तार जालीले चाहिँ घेर्ने चाहिँ काम अब हामी छिट्टै नै सुरु गर्दैछौँ.
We're ready to rebuild it. We'll sow the soil again, build raised seating, plant trees around the pitch and put up a fence around the site. For that, we need financial support. So we've asked the local government for help. We've prepared everything for the reconstruction, but the dam plays the most important part. If we have that, then we've got long-term protection.
त्यो बाँध भयो भने हामी दीर्घकालीन रूपमा चाहिँ सुरक्षित हुन्छौँ.
महत्त्वपूर्ण घोषणा हुन गइरहेको छ दर्शकबिन राइजिङ प्लेयर अफ सर्लाही प्राप्त गर्नेछन् एक थान मोटरसाइकल. यस पाँचौं राजर्षि जनक फुटबल प्रतियोगिता 2077 को राइजिङ प्लेयर अफ सर्लाही हुन सफल हुनु भएको छ.
I have a lot of hopes from the young generation because what I've seen is that they are capable and they are also very interested in this. I think they could lead. I think only young generation can do that. Old folks are gone, right? They cannot do it.
Millions of young people united globally gives me hope and gives me the courage to fight and to act for the climate. And vision of future where all of the peoples get equal opportunity, equal rights. They all get that right to live in a peaceful and fair society. No one in the future should be forced to give away their dreams, to give away their thoughts, to give away their anything due to the changing climate. And vision of future where no one is talking about climate change, no one is talking about climate justice because there is no need of it.